webinar. This module, this Future Leaders module, is a joint initiative between the Brain Research and the MedTech research networks. And our mission with this module is to help ECRs meet each other and develop new ideas and perspectives and develop practical career skills. So the events and this webinar series that we're going to be hosting are going to focus on a range of topics that are useful and relevant to ECRs no matter what field you're in. So we really hope that you spread the word and join us for this webinar, future webinars, and the upcoming events. And at the end of this webinar, we're just going to have a quick summary of some of the things that are coming up at the end. So before I introduce our speakers, just a couple of housekeeping things. We're going to have a 10-minute presentation from each of our speakers, and then the remaining time we're going to have a discussion about the ideas that they talked about. So we are very keen to hear your thoughts and questions, and you'll see that the link in the chat to the Slido, so you can join in there, and we encourage you to join in because at the end of the session we'll get some feedback from you about how this went, and you can post any questions anonymously to the Slido. You can also post questions into the Zoom chat, which is obviously not anonymous, and of course our preference is that you will ask your questions, turn your camera on and join us and ask your questions in person. So we'll talk about that at the discussion time. And yeah, we're keen on seeing all your faces because a huge priority for this webinar series is for ECRs around the country to connect with each other. And until we can get our in-person events going, Zoom's the best we've got. So we really appreciate if you can turn your cameras on. We'd love to see you. This is a very kind of relaxed atmosphere. You'll see we are going to record this session because we are really keen to share some of the insights that Josh and Sam are going to present to other members. But just keep in mind that it is recording, but we're very keen to hear from you and all your questions. So yeah, so today's webinar, we're going to dive into some ideas and examples around working in transdisciplinary teams, how to work within these teams, and how to communicate your research to a really wide range of people who might have a very different knowledge base to you. So we have two amazing speakers who have a very rich experience in doing exactly this, collaborative research with people from all walks of life, not just scientists from potentially different fields, but also clinicians and healthcare providers and members of their local community. So our first speaker, who we may switch the order around if she hasn't made it into the chat just yet, is Associate Professor Samantha Holdsworth. She's a medical physicist and academic researcher in the field of human brain imaging, and she's credited with developing technological advances in MRI that have opened the doors to improve detection and diagnostic health approaches globally. And Sam is the founder and director of Mātai, a medical imaging research and education centre based in Tairāwhiti. And she's going to tell us all about how Mātai is bringing science to the local community. And then our second speaker is Dr. Josh McGeown, who is a research fellow at Mātai and a member of the AUT Traumatic Brain Injury Network. He's an early career researcher with a really diverse skill set and a focus on translational research. He's got extensive experience in driving clinical and community embedded multidisciplinary projects, and is going to give us some insights into his experience and some tips he's picked up along the way. So I haven't seen Sam. So Josh, I think I'm going to invite you to take it away. And yeah.
Sweet. Thanks, Helen. And thanks for having us today. Sam's run into the black screen of death on her laptop, so she's just trying to sort that out. For those of you who don't know, Sam will give a more detailed background about Mātai, but just a quick one is we're based in Gisborne, Tairāwhiti, and we're a medical research institute really focused on leveraging world-class MRI imaging to address community needs. So trying to use the really great equipment and team we have to actually tackle health challenges that are presented here, and specifically to address issues in inequity between Maori and non-Maori New Zealanders. So that's just quick background. Sam will go more into that. I'll share my screen. Can you see that? All good? Okay, I'm just gonna make you guys smaller so I can see more. Cool. So I thought it would be useful for this workshop just to talk about how I go about engaging with the community and building multidisciplinary collaborations. I've got a very diverse background, which is a blessing and a curse. It comes in quite useful for doing multidisciplinary research, but sometimes I feel like a fish out of water with people who have innate expertise in one area. But given the landscape of medtech and brain research, kind of tackling a lot of the problems we're working with, the only way to do it is to work together and to partner with the community and clinicians. So this is just me sharing some of my insights I've learned along the way. So we all know the general process of kind of translational research, starting with something that might be in very controlled setting in a lab and working up through clinical trials and epidemiology. But this can be a really slow process that can take up to 17 years from taking that thing that looks great in the lab and actually getting it out there into a point where it's making a real difference. And from my experiences so far, it seems to be because even though this is an additive process where research builds on prior work, it's often very siloed, and we need to be focusing kind of in those transitionary points from one stage to another. And that's where collaboration comes in, is having people who exist at different points of this continuum all talking to each other from the very early stages to have a good idea of where is this heading and how might it fit into the process. So as an early career researcher myself, I believe we need to really focus on how can we accelerate these outcomes through more effective collaboration as we go forward. So one of the most important things, whether you're engaging with community or clinicians, is obviously to identify who do you need to partner with. And so that just takes, sifting through what's your question, what's your problem, who do you need? And then the best thing to do is to get an introduction. So I've only been in Gisborne for about a year. And the most valuable thing that I've had is we have a doctor as a part of our team who has lived here his whole life and is connected to everyone. So I ran a project here where I was embedded with a rugby team in a school, and we collected a whole bunch of data over the course of the season about how hitting your head over and over again playing rugby may or may not lead to changes in the brain. So this doctor was able to get me straight in contact with the VP of that school, and I was able to get in front of him and kind of pitch the study, and we were off and running. So it starts with, identify who's that linchpin in this process and getting your study rolling and getting the partnership going. And if you can, get an introduction, whether that's a friend you went to school with who works in a school, or whether that's a friend, your partner's friend who's a nurse in a hospital that has a certain surgeon you're trying to reach, something like that. Try to find a common connection. Obviously, you can't always find a common connection. So sometimes you might have to be sending an email, a phone call, or just cold calling someone and just showing up and saying, hey, I'm interested in working together. And I think the most important thing with this that I've learned since being in Gisborne and with working with some of the people here is focus on the so what. As scientists, I think we can get, really bogged down in the details because details are what excite us. But for a lot of people who operate primarily outside of academia, it's really just what is the big picture outcome we're trying to get, and focus in on that, because you really want to avoid this response that this little video is showing here. Is someone you finally got an opportunity to get in front of them, and we don't have a clear message about why should they care about what we're doing and why should they get engaged, whether they're a leader in the community that you're trying to access, or whether they're a clinician that is the gateway to a certain patient population you're interested in working with. This might be the most important one, which I think is listen early. I think it's fairly common for us to kind of design a study almost in entirety and then take it forward to potential partners and say, hey, can you give a sign of approval for this, or can you open the door for us to execute this? Whereas what we should be doing is going in early with a general idea of a project that we'd like to tackle, or a question we're trying to answer, and bring those community members or clinicians in as partners from the very beginning. Because they'll oftentimes raise things that we as scientists might not even think about that will be essential to pulling the study off, or pulling or pushing things through the stages of translation to get to that endpoint that we're all working towards. And then by listening and actually implementing these ideas that they have, it's going to increase their investment and buy-in, because they actually see their effort being reflected in this awesome body of work. And obviously it avoids tokenism. So a really good example of this issue with listening here in Tairāwhiti was with the vaccine rollout. I think it was pretty well known that Tairāwhiti was kind of lagging behind the rest of the country for quite a while there. And that's because in this community, there's some people who, for a variety of probably pretty good reasons, maybe don't have the most trust in the government. So this idea of just having pamphlets and posters and YouTube videos saying you should go get your vaccine wasn't really enough for a lot of people to feel confident enough to go get it. So someone who we work with here who leads iwi healthcare provider, he identified very early that what they needed to be doing is actually going out into the community and meeting people with people that they trust and that they know, and having those people disseminate the safety and the benefits of the vaccine in order to kind of get people to decide to take it. So had that been a part of the vaccination campaign from the beginning, you know, that rollout probably would have been much faster and implemented in less time. And then if listening first, what isn't the most important thing? I think bringing value is the most important thing. So oftentimes in our studies, we've got something in the information sheet that says there will be no direct benefit to you from participating in this study. However, knowledge gained might benefit people like you in the future, you know, something along those lines. And while that's fine, getting people to buy in and be a part of what we're working on, we need to still find a way to bring value to them, whether directly or peripherally, due to the research that's going on. So thinking beyond just giving people vouchers, because, you know, when we give someone a fuel voucher or a countdown voucher, what we're really doing is we're compensating them for the inconvenience of participating in research. That's not a benefit of being in the study. So can we have peripheral benefits, like we've done things at Mātai where maybe there isn't a direct benefit to the participant, but we're creating internships and scholarships so that people from the local community can get involved with this work and then eventually themselves be driving it in the future. You might do embedded designs like I did with this rugby team, where I was with them for an entire season. And through being there, the players and people around it are getting exposed to research and academia and that as a potential career path that they might not have been exposed to otherwise. And parents and kids and whatnot and teachers are getting to ask me questions about concussion and brain injury, and they're benefiting through learning about this issue via the research happening. From a clinician point of view, you really want to bring value to them because they're already often very stretched to begin with. So if you're asking them to get involved with a project, you know, bringing value in the form of, hey, I'm going to make this no hassle for you because I'm going to be fully embedded, you know, in your clinical model and make sure that you're not having to do any extra work, if that's possible. If that's not possible, you know, offering things like authorship. I think we sometimes take it for granted how valuable having your name on a paper can be. So making sure that that's something that brings value to them if they're helping you out. Or if any of those things aren't an option, maybe they're sitting on some clinical data that they'd like to look through, and you can use your computer savviness and some stat skills just to crunch some data and give them some figures. Just finding a way where you give them something before you take, because oftentimes we sometimes have to present ourselves in a way where it can be a one-way relationship coming towards us, and just finding a way so that we give first and then take afterwards. These two kind of go together, being seen and being sensitive. I think it's really important to get out in the field, especially if we've got a really specialized skill set that keeps us mostly in our office or in our lab. Is if you want to work with a clinician or you want to engage with a certain corner of the community, ask, hey, do you have something going on that I can come be a part of, that I can come attend some sort of event? If it's a clinician, say, hey, can I come shadow you in your practice? In my experience, whenever I ask a clinician that, they love it because they know that now I'm going to understand the constraints under which they work in, and then that is going to be incorporated into the research, and so that they're not kind of being a part of something that doesn't reflect the struggles that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And then I love this little GIF on the side, because I always think of this all the time when I'm conducting this research, is oftentimes we're working with sensitive groups of people. Maybe someone's had a stroke, or they've got dementia, or their kids had a brain injury, or whatever it might be. we might be really struggling to get the data points we need. So when we get a referral or we get someone coming in, we are really excited about it. But at the end of the day, something bad is happening or has happened to this person in order for them to get to us. So just being aware of how we're perceived and really managing that. I had to really carefully negotiate when I was working with this rugby team and a player would get concussed about how we approach that and engage them into the research, because otherwise it looks like I'm this guy standing on the sideline hoping that teenage boys are getting brain injuries, which is obviously not how we want to be perceived as scientists. And then last thing is just know what you're asking for. You know, don't over ask, don't under ask, just go in and have a really, just like a business pitch, have a really clear, this is exactly what I need from you. So when I got introduced to this principal of the school I needed to work with, he said, yep, I'm on board. What do you need from me? And all I said is I need access to the team, everyone at once. And ideally, if they're interested in the study, can we get them out of class? Because it's just easier to get them assessed and things during the school day when they've got some structure in their life versus after school when it's just a free-for-all. And going in with that, he said, yep, doors are open. We'll figure out the rest of the details later. So just really know what it is you're asking for. Sorry, I've got a puppy who's being needy in the corner, so hopefully she doesn't get too noisy. So now we've engaged, we've built relationships with people. Now we actually want to have a team going forward. And it sounds obvious, but actively seek and put people on the team that have different skill sets than your own. You know, at Mātai, I think we do a really good job. We're on the projects we're working on. I'm kind of the clinically oriented translational person. We've got engineers, we've got imaging scientists, we've got modelers, everyone brings something completely different. And through that, we actually learn a lot more than if we just kind of stayed obviously within our one silo. And I think something really important that I've learned in terms of being in this community specifically is that expertise isn't only determined by the letters after someone's name, whether it's PhD, MD, MSc, whatever. And a good example of that is one of our most crucial people who helps us out is a local Komatua, a Maori elder. And he opens doorways and provides us knowledge that we would never have access to without him. So think outside the box in terms of who's on your multidisciplinary team and what type of expertise that they bring. I think I've talked to some people in the past and they get nervous about, well, I'm kind of worried about reaching out to someone outside of my area and inviting them in. I don't want them to think that I don't want them to think that I'm incompetent. Sorry, I'm getting thrown up. I don't want them to think I'm incompetent, but in my experience, if someone asks me for expertise or for input, I find it flattering. You know, someone else I respect has come forward and say, hey, I think you would add value to this. What do you think? So don't be nervous from that point of view. And then the last thing is plant collaborative seeds with other ECRs early, because that way you guys can grow together. Your networks grow as we grow. And next thing you know, 20 years from now, we've got these big worldwide networks tackling these really complex problems. And I do have one more slide, but it's not very important. And I've got a noisy puppy, so I'm just going to cut it here. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. The puppy's, I'm sure, incredibly adorable, so we don't mind at all. That's a really, really helpful set of tips and experiences from your research. I've just seen that Sam is here. So we're going to hold questions until we can sort of chat to Sam. How are you going, Sam?
Hi, hi, kia ora everyone. I'm so sorry about being late, and my computer has crashed just before I was about to log on, just as I finished putting a big, lovely movie in my presentation. So I'm hoping we can at least reschedule my talk, but I'd be happy to join in this discussion in the meantime. So really sorry about that.
No, that's all good, Sam. Thanks. We would really appreciate just a couple of your thoughts about setting up Mātai and maybe like some of your ideas around the vision that you had, bringing together all these people, even just without a slide, you know, just your feelings about this kind of multidisciplinary people from completely different backgrounds, bringing them together into what you've created with Mātai.
Yeah, I just caught the end of Josh's talk, but I really agree that there's so many different people from different backgrounds that can make a huge difference in your research. So at Mātai, we have input from iwi, our community, scientists and researchers, and industry. We've got those links to industry as well. So I think the more people you have from different disciplines working on to achieve a common goal, I think it really can enhance not only your own research, but obviously the outcome as well of that research. And so, yeah, I think in building Mātai, I think that was really foremost on my mind. How do we ensure that we get that diversity across different disciplines? Finding people also have the similar values to you, which are collaboration and innovation and trust and that kind of thing, and inclusivity. So I think I think we've built Mātai on the idea of not only sort of that local community collaboration, but also that idea that the more disciplines you bring together, the more of that kind of national, international collaborations you have, the more you can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thank you both for your insights and some of your experiences and working in this sort of way, and really keen to open this up now to everyone in the audience. So as I mentioned at the start, there's a couple of ways you can ask questions. There is the chat function in Zoom. There is the chat function in Slido. The link is just in there, and Julie's posted it in the chat. Or you can pop your hand up and your camera on like Bridget has and start us off with some questions. Bridget, do you want to start?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Josh and Sam, for your insights so far. So Josh, I had a question for you, and maybe Sam, you can comment on this as well if it applies for you. Josh, you said right at the beginning that sometimes you feel like you're a fish out of water when you're dealing with people from different disciplines. And can definitely relate to that. And I just wondered if you had any tips on how to deal with that, I guess, how to overcome that feeling of being a fish out of water.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's somewhat my own doing, because I've intentionally tried to develop a broad skill set so that I can kind of be the glue between different disciplines. So I've intentionally haven't gone too deep in one thing for that reason. But I think the most important thing that was going to be on my last slide before this one started going a little nuts is just reading outside of your comfort zone is really important. And so if you're working in a team with several other people with different skill sets, I generally try to ask, are there 2 to 3 cornerstone papers in your topic that I should definitely read to kind of start to wrap my head around what you're up to, or to understand where you come from. I find that's a really useful way to do it, and using a journal club as well. I know that's like the most old school thing in academia, but when you do it with a really diverse group of people, you can read the same paper in 6, 7 different ways. And I find that's really useful as well, as now you understand the intricacies that different backgrounds dive into. And the last thing I'll say is I think having imposter syndrome as an academic is as common as having a coffee addiction. I think it's just par for the course. And the reality is we all know much more than we credit ourselves for. And so just being confident, be confident in what you know and admit what you don't know. And that's basically how I get through it.
I just really like to add to that. I totally agree with what Josh is saying around sort of overcoming that. I mean, I'm a perfect example of someone with imposter syndrome, and I had that myself when I went to Stanford. I was at Stanford for 11 years, and those first 2 years there, I just felt like I didn't belong there. There were so many incredibly smart people, but what you've got to do is you've got to realize that you have strengths and unique strengths and skills, and that you can bring those to the table. And one thing I did to overcome that is I knew I was quite a good communicator, so I wandered over to the Stanford Hospital after year 2 and started talking to the neurosurgeons and neuroradiologists, and it was by that eventually overcame that. I could see that they were interested in collaborating, and that I could add value and they could add value to what I was doing. And that was when the kind of research and discovery came, having that constant kind of trust and communication between them. One of the things that I'll never forget is speaking with different radiologists. Sometimes it's quite good to try and pick out the ones that can speak to you on your level and can communicate as well. I mean, I had some instances where, you know, I was overwhelmed with the jargon. You know, you'd have your radiologist come and say, you know, that's a unilateral glioma in the thalamus and mid-brain region with hypertense lesion on T1, right? That to me was gobbledygook. But then you come to another neuroradiologist saying, what does that mean? They say, oh, it's just a mass in the brain which isn't good. You know, just really simple stuff, because that's all I needed to know to be able to design methods to kind of pick up those tumours. So yeah, just sort of seeking out and just not being afraid that it's okay, you know, that not being worried that it's okay not to understand. You can even not understand things even with disciplines which are really close to yours. I mean, so I'm a physicist, and I, for example, have miscommunication with the engineers in our team. So for several months, one of our bioengineers was talking about stress strain, this and that, and it wasn't until I said, oh, is that the same as Young's modulus, you know? So, and she said, oh yes, that's it. So I mean, that's very similar, close fields, but it wasn't until I realized it was Young's modulus that I could understand what she was saying. So yeah, so don't worry about that. I think the more that you just talk and communicate, the more you can find that crossover. Another example is just recent, where we were talking about post-image post-processing, and the computer vision people were talking about pre-processing. We found that their pre-processing is the same as our post-processing, and it wasn't until we realized that we now were on the same page. So yeah, I think just the more, it's just, everyone has imposter syndrome. I mean, at least everyone I know has that, and it's perfectly okay. In fact, the more I find that the people who have that, I mean, scientists have that a lot, because they're always so analytical and critical of what they do, and they're aware of how much they don't know. So the more you're aware of how much you don't know, the more you kind of feel like an imposter. So yeah, just realize, as long as you're aware of it and realize it, just realize it's there, and that shouldn't stop you from talking to people outside your field.
Yeah, I think you've brought up a really interesting point there, which is, you know, some of the challenges that come about when you're working in these sorts of teams, and finding a common language is often one of the hardest ones, because people have, even within your own field, people have different language, different skill sets, different ways of explaining something. And I'm encouraging other people, by the way, to jump in with some questions, but until I can see some hands, I'll just ask this one first, which is, you know, what other kind of challenges have you encountered in working in this kind of way, and how have you dealt with them, and was it worth it?
Josh, you want to go first, or?
Do you have, I want to think about my answer, if you can go first.
So yeah, David, I think the main challenges is just sort of overcoming your worry that you're not going to understand, or you're not going to be able to add value, I think. But I think that for me was the main challenge. But you know, we're working across several, now we've got, I mean, Mātai's got several different projects going with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and some of them actually, as Josh was saying, they, you know, not necessarily coming from a scientific background. And we've got input from our kaumātua and from our Māori Advisory Board, and everyone has a different perspective and way of looking at things that adds value. And I've never, you know, I see that as a real opportunity. And I love what Josh said about, you know, when you're doing research, it's gone are the days, I think, where, you know, you write single author or dual author papers. I mean, you know, you're making discoveries with big teams now, and you don't have to necessarily have letters behind your name. You know, there are engineers without PhDs. There are, there are iwi leaders without PhDs who add value into the co-design of your projects. And they've ended up. We've just had a recent example I just put on my slide actually, where we've got this wonderful study where we're keen to start, which is called the Tairāwhiti study, and with a huge collaboration with iwi and Auckland Bioengineering Institute, where the whole goal is to scan children from 7 onwards every year for the rest of their lives, to build up models of different organ systems and how they connect with each other. It's something that Auckland Bioengineering are very, very good at, and we've got wonderful models for. And so that there we've actually we've scanned 30 children, and it was a huge collaboration across our community, across scientists, engineers, Mātai, ABI, CBR, FHMS, and we've just submitted an abstract which I've never seen so many authors. I mean, it's got at least 25 authors on it, and that's our iwi, our scientists, our clinicians, and it's to our major MRI conference, and it's just a real example of bringing people together to try and solve a really complex problem that really needs to have and where the value of the project comes from community, right through to the research, through industry, and through different organisations around New Zealand. So sorry for I might not have answered your question, I'm sorry, but maybe Josh is sort of a more specific answer there.
Yeah, I think the most challenging thing can be everyone has different skill set when it comes to communication. And so we've all got, scientific skills that are going to relatively be somewhat similar, but our ability to actually share ideas together can be quite challenging sometimes. So I think I've intentionally built the communication skills and the skill set because I want to be able to go talk to a clinician, talk to an engineer, talk to someone working in a more basic science space and be able to mend to them, but not necessarily everyone can meet in the middle. And that can be sometimes the most difficult thing, is we're trying to move forward on a given idea and we all kind of can get hung up on the details in certain spots that are quite different, and how to negotiate that where it's, okay, maybe we want to sacrifice a little bit of control in this area of the study to maybe have more ecological validity in our findings, and just negotiating that with the difference in communication styles is probably the biggest challenge. But also it makes it, once you get over that hump, that's when you're really a team, is because you really have come together and figured out how to talk each other's language. So while it's a difficulty, it leads to a better outcome in the end.
Yeah, and having that kind of shared sort of vision of what you're trying to do, and does that kind of guide, when you do have those conflicts, you can kind of come back to that. Okay, well, this was the purpose. This is what we're trying to do. Does that kind of help when you have a big team and disagreements happening?
I think so. I think it's, when the end goal is we want something that can eventually be used in real world clinical practice, then you can kind of work back from that and say, okay, where are we willing to make a compromise or to kind of sacrifice one thing for the sake of another when that is the outcome? If we want the best possible model, you might do something different. But if you want the most flexible model that's deployable, there's obviously different trade-offs in that pathway. So it really comes down to, as everything does, what's your question and what's the takeaway?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So go for
I
it,
just
Sam.
want to sort of add to this a bit, is that there some of the challenges I think I've seen in some of the projects is, you are speaking with the community about the needs of a certain project, and we might not have the skills or expertise or more likely even the technology might be able to sort of achieve that goal in the way that they're foreseeing it. And so but that is what comes to having those regular communication and building up that trust, so that you can explain and talk these things through, that there's in some cases there'll be limited resources, or the actual scanner itself can't actually do that with enough power to prove that this either way. So I think just having those constant communication about what we can do as a team and as a resource is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. I'm really keen to hear from people. So, please jump in and ask some questions or even just comment on your thoughts if you've operated in a team like this before and what your experiences have been. Really keen to hear about that as well. Julie, I'm going to jump on your question first, and then Steve, I'm very keen to come to you. Julie, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you want to ask your question in person?
Yeah, my question was, how do you find the people that would help with your project, and how do you engage with them? Like the first contact, it's very tricky, especially when you're not good at communication, like engineers can be sometimes, or scientists.
So I think that's where, again, it comes down, you got to identify, right? So if we take this example of the study that I helped initiate here was, well, we needed to recruit a group of participants that we could kind of keep collective. Okay, so easiest thing to do that is probably through a school or a club. Okay, who do we have some kind of connections to? We've got more connections to the school than we do to the clubs. All right, so we're going to go with the school. Who's someone who's peripherally involved with our organization, who has been here for a while and knows someone from there? Okay, now we leverage that, and now we've got that step in the door. And now who's the biggest fish on the chain we can actually get in touch with, who can enact whatever outcome we need? So, going to, say, a teacher would have been helpful, but then the teacher has to go up, and then that person has to go up. And so now we're in this waiting game. So it's kind of that, just like anything else, reduce your problem into what components do I need to pull this off. So that was the participant problem, and then there was all right, we need a component of this is we're going to have a lot of our players are going to be Maori, just because of the demographics and so how do we make sure that we're accounting for cultural differences in our study design? All right, well, we've got a connection to an iwi healthcare provider. Let's go talk to him and let's present the idea to him. And then he says, who you should go talk to? You go talk to this person. So it's not always that you have this like full brain map of these are the 20 people or the 10 people or the 5 people I have to go to. It's just like anything else. I've got multiple problems. I need to kind of solve them in parallel and just start with 1 or 2. And then chances are that's going to spread out. And next thing you know, as long as you really focus on having a good engagement with whoever your first point of contact is, and you sell them on the so what, they're going to say, oh, who you should go talk to? This person. And now you've got another introduction and another introduction and another introduction. So it starts with that first piece and who can you get a connection through, I think. Yeah.
Awesome. Steve, do you want to jump in with your question?
Oh, look, hi. You may be able to identify that I'm not a new scientist or a new career person, but I've been developing new career paths as I've been going through my own career individually. So I just thought I might share a few insights and exemplify a few things that I've learned along the way myself, and what Josh was just talking about, Julie's question, how do you find the right person? That's identifying the decision makers. It's a business aphorism or truism, I suppose. That's part of the important step. But we'll go right back to some of the points about jargon and about imposter syndrome. I've developed a career where I started off in spectroscopy through materials chemistry and nanomaterials, and ended up in my last role in roading materials. So I knew nothing about roads except they were black and usually full of potholes. But if you're going to accept a position somewhere or a role in a project, it's up to you then to immerse yourself as much as you can in learning about that role, so that you develop your skill set as you progress through it. So that helps to alleviate the issues of imposter syndrome and lack of knowledge. But of course, if you're if you accept any role, doesn't matter if it's a job or otherwise, it behoves you to do the best you can. One of the activities that I have developed now, this is going to be a question, or not a question, well, it's a question and also an opportunity hopefully for Sam, is I'm a motorcycle racer, or have been a motorcycle racer, but I've morphed into becoming a coach for young motorcycle racers. And that's sort of culminated in my latest protege is now at the grand old age of 15 years old, racing in a semi-professional series in Spain or in Europe. But some years ago, Motorcycling New Zealand launched a project with an Italian fellow whose nickname was Lely, but I can't remember his full name. I don't know if you're aware of this.
I know him.
You do? Cool. Mm. Cool. So I don't know. I think that's all come to a sort of a, maybe not a grinding halt, but a staggering demise, that project. But I was wondering how we might step that up again to be in your guys' sphere of influence, so that we may be able to tackle traumatic brain injury in motorcycle races, and that might lead in the future to improved technology for protective equipment.
Do you know Phil London, Steve?
Yes, I know Phil. In fact,
yeah.
I was writing down who was involved, and I've got Connor, and I couldn't remember his surname. So Connor is Phil's son.
Yeah.
And Connor had to give up his racing career at the grand old age of like 22 because of TBI. So
I did some work with them early in my PhD about this. Was before I got into the imaging space, but it's been something I've been meaning to light back up. So
cool.
If you've got that interest, I'd be interested in pursuing.
Yeah, so Phil's business, WorldSport, or supporting agency, I think they've pulled back quite a bit, but nevertheless, they may be interested in re-energizing. And I'm sort of talking with Josh now about real projects, but so I'm just on the cusp of building a proposal to Motorcycling New Zealand for a nationwide youth training, to run and coordinate a nationwide youth training program for road racing for 7 to 17-year-olds. And it would be really cool to be able to get this sort of thing back up and going, for the same reasons that you had in the rugby team, you know. It behoves us to protect our youth, or protect people, and not just youth, everyone, as much as we can. And if this sort of information leads to improvements in helmets and neck restraints and anti-whiplash devices and that sort of thing, then that would be a win for everybody.
This is engagement in real time.
Yeah,
really appreciate it, guys. It's
so,
very much a
look. I'm sure there's some contacts here. We can talk offline and maybe get something going. Yeah, cool. That's all I had to say.
Thanks for that.
Kia kaha to everybody. There is there's a pathway for everyone, and it just learn as much as you can and find those decision makers, Julie. That's the key to that. And and engage. Engage. That's great. Cool.
Thank you. So I'm just going to jump to one of the Slido questions before I go back to Bridget. So the question is, have you faced an adverse situation while approaching community leaders or collaborators? And if so, how did you sway them to a more positive outcome? So have you ever been turned down, or someone just kind of said, yeah, nah, I don't want to be involved?
Josh,
you first.
I mean, so far, all of our engagements have been quite positive, but although it has taken time. So it's several, and a lot of they say sort of several cups of tea to build that trust and that relationship. So I think the times when we've been turned down. I mean, I've directly gone to say clinicians to say, are you interested in being the radiologist or the pediatrician on this project? I've directly asked people even without engaging. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways of engaging with people, and there have been a couple of instances where people have written back to say, look, I'm just so time poor, I can't do it, but have you thought of this person? So I've definitely been turned down a lot, but you just kind of keep trying, and you keep trying to find the leads that you need to get the project up and running. But in terms of sort of community engagement and getting Mātai wouldn't have existed without having the community support. I mean, we wouldn't have started it if we didn't have buy-in from the community, and that took several cups of tea and consultation and taking on board feedback and about how the process, how we should implement our processes and disseminate our work, and that was a 1 to 2, maybe 3 and a year process, and it's an ongoing one, so it's not just a one-off. So I mean, there'll always be people who say, no, can't have the time or not interested. But in general, we've been people have been very open to working with us in different capacities. So, Josh, you might have something more specific.
Yeah, I think obviously I'm still fairly early in this journey, so there's still time to go. But luckily, so far, there hasn't been anyone who's just been outright like, nope. But there has been some times when I was doing my PhD and I was trying to build relationships with some clinicians, and they had been involved with research previously and had a very unpleasant experience where basically they were sold one idea and then they were asked to do much, much more as a part of the project than they were initially told to do or said that they would be doing. So when I presented myself, they were basically, they were ready to shoot me down. But when all those kind of things I touched on in terms of bringing value first, it was, hey, I actually have some clinical skills. I'd like to do this study, but I'm going to put no extra work on you because I'm actually going to be here with you, working beside you, helping fill the gaps when they present themselves. And obviously I had the skills to do that, but it's just, that's an example of when being able to bring some degree of value was able to kind of mend a bridge that looked like it was crumbling before we even got going. That's probably the closest. I think, Sam, we've had, since Mātai's gotten some awesome funding to build a building, and there's been a little bit of negative kickback from some people saying we don't need more imaging in the community. And it's because they don't understand what Mātai is. But then once we engage with them and then actually explain, like, no, here's what we're doing. We're actually creating internships and scholarships for local youth and next thing you know, that naysayer, that person who wanted to maybe not be on board with what we were doing, all of a sudden is going forward and singing your praises. So it's really, in terms of engagement, I think whenever someone asks what you do or where you work or what project you're working on, you're always on, right? And they need to have a pleasant experience with you, because that one negative experience they'll remember and propagate, whereas a good experience, will hopefully stick around as well.
Fantastic, thanks guys. Bridge, you have one last short question maybe before we wrap up. I just want to also, just before you jump in, sorry, just to remind everyone that we've got the Slido poll is running at the moment with a little rating. It'll take you like 2 seconds, so please jump on there and do that. Thanks, sorry, go ahead, Bridge.
Oh, good, cool. I just had a quick question for you, Sam. So I'm just aware of sort of the timing of when we start engaging throughout our career, and obviously we've got people involved in this group right from PhD all the way through to associate professor. Is it ever too early to start engaging?
Well, I don't think so. I think that you can do too much engaging, right? I mean, some people at the early stage of their career are having to dig really, really deep. They might be learning a technique or learning how to code and things like that. And if you end up spending all your time sort of talking and networking, then you're not learning those skills. So I think it's always come down to a little bit of a balance. And I think I certainly did for the first couple of years of my postdoc, my research fellowship. I sort of spent more time sort of knuckling down on this particular method I was trying to learn and get the skills, but then I sort of ramped it up sort of as my career grew. I think the sorts of things that depending on the stage of the career that are really good to do is obviously go to conferences, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of see where your research is and get some perspective on it, so that you make sure that gives you a sanity check as to were you on the right track and what other opportunities are out there to potentially change tack or collaborate with other groups to enhance your research. So conferences and I would encourage, I think this is something I wish I had done more, taking opportunities to speak to community groups quite early on, say U3A or other groups, because it gives you an opportunity to really bring down your very cerebral research, which is what most people here are doing, and try to put it in a way that as people the layman can understand. And by doing that, actually, I think that helps you put your research in perspective as to where sometimes you can get lost in the why, because you're so deep. So I think bringing it out by making sure you're every now and again bringing it at very high level and communicating to the wider community can help. Not only is it wonderful for the community and to recognise science and research and the value of science and research, but it also actually helps you to understand why and give you more energy as to why. Sometimes it can get very, you're in your head a lot of the time, and you're working hard, and sometimes you forget the why, I guess, because you're so deep. So I think I would encourage you, this just because that's what I wish I'd done more, is to get out and try and practice a little bit. I know public speaking might be hard for some people, but the more reps you get in, the better. Eventually you'll get good. So yeah, I think engaging, I'd say I would have encouraged my old self to get out earlier and network a bit more. And I imagine many people here might fit that same bill. So yeah, I think that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Sam.
Cool. All right. Well, in the interest of time, I think it's time for us to wrap up a bit. So thank you so much, Sam and Josh, for giving us some insights into your experiences of working across these teams. If I were to summarize some of these things, it's that, in order to take on some of the big challenges in science at the moment and to really make an impact in our communities, we need to really work across different groups, not just different scientists sort of collaborations, but different community and clinical outreach, so that we can actually take our research into something that's going to really benefit our communities. And Josh offered so many useful tips. I think the journal club, doing that with different groups of people from different fields is such a great idea, and finding that common language that you can use to help bridge the communication gap between these fields is one of those things that I think will be really useful for people trying to take this into their own research. So thank you guys so much for that. I really appreciate your time today. And for everyone, just before you head off, there is another poll up in the Slido, which is just a sort of a summary of what you thought was sort of a great take-home message from this. And Bridget's just going to quickly put up a slide that shows what we've got coming up next. Do you want to take that away, Bridget?
Yes. Thanks, Helen. So just very quickly, I'd just like to draw your attention to number 2 on this list. So the Health Tech Week Future Leader Symposium is the first opportunity for us to get together and meet in person. The date is June 29th, and there'll be a call for applications for that coming out soon. So please keep an eye out for that, and just to note that travel support is available. So yeah, and I've just got listed on here the other things that are coming up, but that was the main thing that I wanted to draw your attention to. And obviously we'll have another of these speaker series in 2 months' time, which will be in June. So again, just keep your eye out for the mailing lists for the information about that. Thanks very much, everybody.
Cool. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.